the drum beat on the extra credit train. That's a mixed metaphor. Opportunities for this class. We have a couple of local not-for-profit, so federal agency land management organizations, one of which is Green Earth Incorporated. And they run 6 or 8 kind of small but actually pretty nice green spaces. There's a demonstration Tallgrass Prairie over on Sunset by the Unitarian Church and the dog park. They run a whole bunch of small green spaces, essentially just wooded lots here inside Carbondale, and some of them are big enough to have things like hiking trails. So over the years, I've helped Green Earth, design, maintain those trails and stuff like that. And periodically, they are one of many organizations that would love an extra hand on trail maintenance and stuff like that. So if you are interested in doing stuff with your body and enriching your mind and learning about what we're talking about in this class, here are a couple of options with that. I think Shawnee National Forest, Friends of the Shawnee, has moved their website, so maybe hit Google for that one. But when we set it up 10 years ago, I was on the board of directors for that to get it going. That was the old URL for that. Also, we have a national wildlife refuge just down the way. So if you like fishing, rock and roll. If you like looking at eagles, bald eagles, our national bird, check out Crab Orchard. They're always looking for a little bit of help on just like cleaning up stuff as well. It's a pretty all right thing. So this is one of the Green Earth trail work things. We're piking or raising a section of trail above hydric or water saturated soils. This is over by the this is, I think, the Brush Hill Preserve that they run over by the intersections of Logan Street and Park Street here in town. That's pretty cool. That's my name. And so when I was younger and not so tired, we did a whole bunch of trail work and stuff like that. And just a nice way to spend a couple hours on a Saturday, getting to know folks and leaving a positive mark and doing some forestry stuff. Okay, cool. This is an example of bog bridging or puncheon bridging. So this is how organizations like Napoleon's Army, for example, got cannon across swamps and stuff like that to go shoot at the English. But for forestry, and in particular for forest recreation management, using materials on site saves a whole lot of sweat equity in terms of having to hike in pressure-treated dimensional lumber to get people across saturated soils, all because saturated soils are very fragile. A wet soil can't handle our boot prints or our hoof prints or our tire tracks across it without getting severely damaged, really kind of with the first couple of trampling passes. So, all that to say, you can see what this stuff looks like. You can experience what it's like to put this in and develop an appreciation for forest rec management and what park rangers do and what trail crews do in this case, and get some extra credit for class if that's something that you would like to do. Okay, cool. So we have been talking about some just early definitions and relationships, and terms matter, right? So it's the difference between board and board. We want to make sure that everybody's getting off on the right foot with these. So we left off last Thursday's class session talking about the first definition for the class, and that was a concessionaire. And that is, again, somebody who is running their business on the premise of having access to the national park, the state park, the national forest or wildlife refuge or wilderness area that you are running as the ranger or forest protection officer, whatever your job title is and so forth. I'll post all of these PowerPoints on the course website, so if you prefer to take notes that way, or if your cell phone camera pictures of it are a little bit blurry or off angle, you'll have the digital copy as well. The only caveat with that is the spicy memes and GIFs that are animated on this sometimes get sort of compressed down to a still frame by D2L, our faithful and awesome course software. So we won't have some of the videos on there, but you'll have those in class, right? So anyway, moving on. So when I talk about borders, I'm going to use the term boundaries and property lines interchangeably with that. So for anybody in the geography department, this is the border of the polygons that you guys are learning to work with in GIS. So borders matter a lot. For example, here in one sort of section south of campus, we have in like a 100-meter circular radius of one fixed point, we have partially Shawnee National Forest, partially Crab Orchard National Wildlife Refuge, partially Giant City State Park, and partially Touch of Nature Environmental Center, right? So it's the same ecosystem, right? It's the same species of trees on either side of these imaginary human placed lines that are invisible on the landscape, except when they're not invisible. So Shawnee National Forest has a different land management policy, different needs, different mission, different vocabulary than Crab Orchard. The National Wildlife Refuge System is run by an agency of the Department of Interior, Fish and Wildlife Service, versus the United States Department of Agriculture, which runs the United States Forest Service, which runs Shawnee. So you can have so-called fence line ecology effects on either side of a totally otherwise imaginary line that humans just sort of drew on a map there at one point. Make sense? Okay. So this is especially thrown into recreation management in terms of stuff like at Rocky Mountain National Park, where we have a square-ish national park. It was one of the first ones created in the very first years of the 1900s, 1906 or so. And Rocky Mountain National Park was put in place by Congress 10 years before they invented the National Park Service to run it. So we had a bunch of national parks before we had a National Park Service and professional rangers. More on that later. And Rocky Mountain National Park was one of these new borders sort of draped around an area in Colorado along the Front Range outside of Denver and Fort Collins that already had a whole bunch of prior human occupation and uses, right? So obviously First Nations people for time immemorial, last couple of thousand years at least, and more recently, you know, sort of the settlers that turned Colorado from a wildland into a territory, into a state. There's a whole bunch of abandoned mines, silver mines mostly, in what is now Rocky Mountain National Park. And so if you look very closely at specific versions of the map of Rocky Mountain National Park, it's got miles and miles, hundreds of miles of exterior perimeter border. But it's also got some interior border that are holes on the map. Each one of those is an inholding or an enclave or a mining claim. So when you go, anybody been to Rocky Mountain National Park before? Yeah, it's a pretty alright place, yeah? Okay, better than a sharp stick in the eye. And there are signs in the visitor center, for example, that say, hey, if you want to go out and just like walk through the forest here, have a blast, just don't do it in like this area here, because there's a whole bunch of not well marked, some of them not even well known, pit mine shaft openings, and you can just fall down and never be found, right? In a place where millions of people go every year, you can just vanish into a hole in the ground that somebody left when they played out their silver mine claim, okay? So, borders matter a lot. It's more than just a line on a map. If you're the adjacent landowner to Shawnee National Forest, for example, you care a lot about where that border is and the management decisions that those foresters are making on the other side of the back edge of your lawn, right? Huge deal about the decisions you're making, because as the FMO, the Fire Management Officer for the Shawnee National Forest, your decisions and how you execute them mean a lot for the landowners that have to deal with, you know, maybe a fire that gets out of control on your land. And it becomes a problem when it crosses a border onto their land. All right, beyond that, primitive. This is a term that we're going to use to describe a specific style of forest and outdoor recreation, and it's evolved in its usage from just describing how there's not going to be a bunch of flush toilets, there's not going to be electricity, There's not going to be Wi-Fi. There may or may not be cellular coverage, right? Cellular coverage is a very young thing relative to camping, the idea of camping. So, primitive just describes, hey, we're not going to give you a bunch of services here on purpose so that you don't have to deal with everybody else bringing a bunch of noisy and interruptive service needs in. Like, until the invention of Bluetooth speakers, you could go into a forest and be reasonably sure that you didn't have to listen to somebody else's horrible choices about listening to Drake, right? So, controversial take, I know. But we do this on purpose. We're not on the hook, and we don't want to be on the hook, and we are explicitly telling people you shouldn't expect certain things from us in certain places. The logical extreme of this approach of providing developed areas versus primitive areas is that out beyond primitive, we have wildlands where you'll have even less service or even lower standard trails. The trails aren't as smoothed out. They are more rocky, they're more rooty, they're more twisty. They go straight up and down mountains instead of gently switchbacking up and down, and so forth. The extreme of sort of the idea of primitive activities, primitive camping, stuff like that, are so-called no rescue zones, areas proposed in national wildernesses for people who really, really want to have no safety net, no search and rescue team, no backcountry ranger coming after them to check in and make sure that they're okay. Some folks really see some value in that. Okay? So, it's kind of a wild idea, no pun intended. But this is what I mean when I say primitive. Low standard, not much development, not a lot of services or amenities, also on our list. Okay? Experience. Experience is not just a point system in Dungeons and Dragons, or the milestone system if you know what that. Experiences in forest and outdoor recreation management refers to the idea of we are providing forests, we're providing beaches, we're providing cave systems and mountain ridges and vista points and all of this stuff. Those are all physical things. All of the intangible of what we are providing those things for is under the umbrella of the term experience. We're trying to provide at least opportunity for you to experience a beautiful sunrise on top of Cadillac Mountain at Acadia National Park. 2 weeks in the summer. It's the first place the sun's rays hit anywhere in North America. Right at the top of that one mountain, right at the eastern edge of the continent. Pretty cool stuff, right? So you need the physical mountain there for that, but there's something about the human experience of being on top of that mountain during that 2-week period and knowing that you are the first person, or you and the other 1,000 people up on top of the summit that morning, to see the sun's rays, okay? So that's an experience. It's the intangible human subjective part of how we move through and take in the physical resources. Okay? That's all experience or experiential. You'll also hear the word opportunity a lot with this, because I can't make you, as a park ranger, have a specific memorable or even life-changing experience. All I can do is set the context for it. So, any of you guys in the wildlife habitat management and conservation LAMCON specialization, show of hands? All right, this is exactly the same thing for humans as you can't make a population of American bison breed. Like you can't set out bottles of wine and Viagra and, I don't know, Barry Manilow music or whatever bison listen to Netflix and chill out there. All you can do is provide the context for it, right? You can't force someone to do something or experience something in a certain way. You can just provide the opportunity for it. You are the context. You are providing, yeah.
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Exactly. Lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. We are going to use the term visitor and user and tourist and guest interchangeably in this class, right? It's somebody who's coming to your national forest or your park or whatever you're managing, and they're there on a temporary basis. Now, they might be local. They might live next to, or even in some few communities here on the Shawnee, we've got entire small towns inside the larger perimeter, the minimum convex polygon of Shawnee National Forest. But when they're on the forest, they're a visitor. Okay? When they're in their house inside, they're not on the forest, even though they're inside the polygon. It's complicated. All right? So, visitor, user, guest, traveler, tourist, all kind of talking about the same thing. Somebody who's there temporarily to seek out the opportunity to experience your awesome professional management of some world-class resources and experiences. Okay? Cool. Recreation is the field that we're talking about, obviously. So, we have a recreation department and 3 different majors in that department all the way across campus over in human services, human sciences. This is a forestry class. So, when we are talking about recreation, we're talking about recreation management, managing the forest. Not necessarily being the adventure trip leader like the Scoutmaster, for example, or the adventure guide, counselor, trip leader for an adventure recreation trip like Outward Bound or Knowles National Outdoor Leadership School, where you pay somebody a couple $1,000 and they take you on like a 3-week-long backpacking trip, teach you a bunch of survival skills, stuff like that. Also train you up in some cool sort of personal development kind of stuff. All of this is under the umbrella of recreation. It is using, and we'll talk a lot more about this term later, but we're using that as our sort of semester-wide, semester-long catch-all term for what we are trying to manage. Opportunity, talked about this with experience. They are not the same thing, right? So the experience is what the person, the visitor, actually consumes. The opportunity is what you, as the manager, provide for them to get there. Okay? And you are curating this list. You're shaping this list, saying, this opportunity here is a good one. You can go horseback riding on the Shawnee National Forest, but you are saying, at least in the case of Shawnee lately, you cannot go mountain biking on the same horseback riding trails. Now, feasibly, physically, you could, absolutely. There were actually really nice trails for mountain biking if that was an allowed use of those horseback riding trails. But as it turns out, horses are dumb. They're very charismatic, but they're kind of dumb. No, that's not fair. They don't have the same brain that we do. We have an entire lobe of the brain that they don't. And so a horse sees somebody on a mountain bike moving fast, and it looks like this sort of strange and scary looking wheeled centaur human hybrid monster thing that the horse is not used to seeing. And so the horse freaks out, bucks, throws the rider hits their head on the ground, stops their fall with their neck, Christopher Reeve style, becomes paralyzed or dies. Everybody's sad. So the managers, the district foresters who are curating that list of opportunities that are allowed on Shawnee National Forest on a particular resource of the Horse Trail Network, they're saying yes to horses. They've spent millions of dollars building those trails. More on that story later. It involves anti-personnel mines and eco-terrorism and stuff. The Shawnee is wilding, as the youth say. All right? But they are not saying that mountain biking is okay for those same trails. We'll talk about what the Shawnee has said and not said about rock climbing over the years later in the class, okay? We're going to talk about 4 different kinds of capacity in this class. So, if you think about the Shawnee National Forest, it's a certain number of acres, or hectares, right? A unit of surface square area measured. Square meters would be another one, okay? But hectares are not a thing. Don't put that in your notes. Hectares or acres, not hectares, okay? Capacity refers to one of 4 different sets of numbers for any unit or chunk of area, like the Shawnee National Forest, for the eastern or western district of the Shawnee National Forest, smaller management units inside of that, or specific recreation sites, smaller units still inside those units. There's a certain number of people that we can stick onto that space, right? If we have everybody, packed in, standing face to face, like shoulder to shoulder, everybody inside everybody else's bubble, that's the physical carrying capacity. But there's a biological carrying capacity. How many people, how many humans, according to the activities that they're doing, how many humans can we have in Jackson Falls Natural Area, one little chunk of Shawnee National Forest, before that ecosystem starts to collapse, or at least show some serious signs of strain, either temporary or permanent, right? So we trample the grass, we pollute the water occasionally, sometimes when we're in a place. And how much of humanity can this place take before we start seeing, the creatures, the plants, the vegetation, the microbiotic communities starting to collapse? That's ecological capacity. We also have social carrying capacity. How many people can we have in a place, visible to each other, before the people, not the plants, the people start saying, man, like this place is nice, but there are just too many people here for me to enjoy this. So show of hands, how many of you guys and gals have ever been in a classroom where the number of students in the classroom was kind of fine? Like the AC system could keep up with that many bodies putting out hot air, and people coming in with Axe body spray and BO and whatever else. And it was kind of fine. Like everybody was spread out, not a big deal. Maybe you're feeling like it's okay in this classroom today, right? We're only even in the front half of this class, yeah? Everybody had an experience of plenty enough social carrying capacity in a room? Cool, me too. Has anybody ever had an experience of, I'm in this classroom and there are too many people in this classroom? Yeah?
The
What was
board
that
I
like?
used the other day.
Okay, so what was that experience like?
There was no chairs at all.
Okay.
There was like multiple people just standing around,
Standing room only, that's kind of uncomfortable for a while. All right.
and it's kind of hard to get in the doors too.
That sounds like a fire risk. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody ever been in a classroom where there was just too many people?
Hot crowded.
Hot and crowded. Did you feel like you could learn at an optimal rate and quality?
As much.
That's interesting. The number of people in the room affects your personal, subjective, but your experience of trying to learn in that classroom, trying to get the value out of the money that you're putting into it, right? So this is absolutely a thing in forest and outdoor recreation management. The social carrying capacity of a place, right? This is the difference between, if you've ever been to like Fox Theater in St. Louis, like the old time theater places where not really air conditioned or anything like that, and it's fine, too many people, right? It's just a real sharp tipping point between fine and crowded, and you know what, honey? Let's just leave early. I'm not into this. I'm not feeling it, the mood or the vibe, right? So capacity is a thing. The fourth carrying capacity is managerial carrying capacity. We'll talk about that one more in the senior level class, Park and Wildlife Management. Backcountry, our next term, refers to all the stuff that's not front country. So front country is where we have paved roads and septic systems or sewer and electricity and traffic lights and so on and so forth in major national parks. Okay. Your visitor center is pretty much always front country. There's usually bathrooms there. There are people in air conditioning handing you maps, and it's a relatively civilized environment. That's all front country. Front country facilities tend to be things like picnic areas or wildlife viewing points. You ever seen like a big paved area on the side of the road, and there's maybe like a sign there, like one of those wildlife spotting scopes, like mounted on the ground. Yeah, that's all front country. By contrast, back country or wildlands are places where the most development you might get are maybe an open side, like a 3-wall shelter with an open face, and it's got a roof, but it's open to the elements. So you can get out of rain and storms and stuff like that, but you can't it's not real comfortable to stay there long term, for example. Okay, so backcountry is going to be where your backcountry rangers are on solo patrol, typically. Where your backcountry trail crews are not driving out for the day's work in the work truck and hiking tools in several hundred yards. They are taking a mule train of 2, 3, 4, 10 horses or mules, and they're out there the whole season. And they gotta be self-supported for, up to a couple of weeks at a time, because it takes maybe a week to get to where the trail work is in the backcountry, because the only travel in the backcountry is by foot or by hoof, or in some cases by mountain biking wheels, for example, for bike touring. Okay? Cool. Next turn. Accommodations. Accommodations are pretty much the measures that you take, the efforts that you undertake to make the experience more commodious, more pleasant for your visitors. So, accommodations can be as formal as we have taken this particular environmental interpretive trail that teaches you a whole bunch of our native wildflower species in our butterfly garden. We've paved that and made it perfectly flat around our visitor center in a big loop so that anybody in a wheelchair can enjoy that particular trail. It can be as informal as we are way back in the back country section of this major national park's designated wilderness area, and we have a side trail that goes off of the hiking trail, the backpacking trail that you're on, a side trail that's marked with a little sign that says Spring 0.1, meaning 1/10 of a mile away, about 500 feet. We've got a spot on the surface of the earth where the water table intersects the surface of the planet, and you can get fresh water there. Probably still need to treat it, but we put in the effort to build 500 extra feet of trail so that our backpackers had a fairly steady, reliable source of water, because we know there's not a lot of water sources before or after it on this segment of trail. Make sense? So that accommodation is any extra effort that we put into helping folks connect through opportunity to experience. Okay? That's facilities, that's programs you do, as like fireside stuff or guided hikes, could be anything. Picnic. Does anybody not know what a picnic is? Moving on. All right. Degradation. It's not just a kink anymore. No, it's we're going to use the term degradation to talk about environmental and experience resource impacts. Okay? So, National Park Service is created to be the number one resource preservation organization in the world, bar none. So anything off of perfect and anything that is permanently degraded from perfect is a serious, serious problem for the United States National Park Service. They cannot let that rest. They will go very, very, very hard on trying to prevent that first and trying to ameliorate it second. The United States National Park Service is one of the, if not the largest, administrator of Superfund sites. Anybody familiar with what Superfund is? So in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, American industrial power became this amazing thing, and our ability to invent chemicals like DDT or DEET, which is It's a mosquito repellent, but also it's used to make plastics feel softer. Imagine what it does to your DNA. Anyway, we figured out how to do a bunch of stuff. We figured out how to make Teflon, right? Non-stick coatings on our pots and pans. Turns out it'll, kill you pretty hard with cancer. But you don't have to scrub your dishes as hard, so that's nice, right? So the 1950s and 60s was really a time, kind of post-World War II, where we got really, really good at that that mode of life where it's like, we were so busy asking whether we could, we didn't stop to think whether we should. And so Superfund sites are like nuclear accident sites. Places of old industrial contamination or mine drainage, for example. And the United States National Park Service manages billions and billions and billions of dollars of effort in terms of Superfund sites that happen to be inside national parks, usually old mines, and they are the vanguard. They are keeping that damage from spreading, from intensifying, they are repairing, and so forth. Okay? So, impacts are the mechanism by which degradation happens. So, degradation is what we need to avoid. Impacts are what we need to manage to avoid it. So, every time you are walking across the grass in front of the ag building here from Stiegel Hall or Lenz Dining Hall, and you're late to class, so you're walking through the grass, and you're jogging through, every footfall that you plant on that grass, no pun intended, is an impact. It's a literal physical impact, right? But it's also bending some of those grass blades, it's snapping some of those grass blades, killing some of them. Now, grass is highly resistant to trampling. It can handle a lot of us walking across a lot of grass on a lot of days. But eventually, right, you get that trampled out section, kind of like if you look at any hard played football field that's not turf or soccer field, something like that, they're just bare spots, kind of right in front of the goals and usually at the 50-yard mark of the middle line. Those are impacts that have added up to the point of being, sort of accumulating. The impacts are accumulating faster than the grass can regrow. And so you get shifted to turf and then everybody gets knee injuries. Impairment is a more specific term for an impact that is so severe it's become functionally permanent. And it's called an impairment because it's impairing your ability to manage that or other impacts. Okay? So if we walked along the grass here so much that we walked away all the grass, and then we walked away all the soil underneath the grass, and then we started walking down on the bedrock, 20 feet below, and started like carving a trail or a trench with our boot soles on that. That would take a lot of walking. But we could do it, by golly. That would be an impairment. Like there's no fixing bedrock once it's screwed up, right? We can replant grass. That won't be an impairment. Not a big deal. It is an impact, and it's an expensive one, but we can deal with it. All right. Vandalism is when people are creating negative impacts on purpose. Okay?
Like carving into trees.
Like carving into trees, or carving into reefs, or taking a gas-powered rock saw and carving petroglyphs out of a cliff face and taking them home or selling them on the black market. Yeah, that's a thing. Or going into the lava tube graves of Native Hawaiian royalty in places like Haleakala National Park, Greater Wilderness Area, and exfiltrating like a pinky bone. Like this was, if Native Hawaiians were also into Dragon Ball Z, King Kamehameha or something like that. Like a lot of, essentially the equivalent of the United States president are buried up there and venerated for Native Hawaiians. Vandalism would be taking any of those human relics and being like, I got a pinky bone. Isn't that cool? No, it's actually kind of weird, right? So vandalism is a specific on purpose. Usually the person knows that they are breaking federal law and so forth, and they're just going to do it anyway. And we'll talk about why that happens. How does somebody get up one day and be like, today I'm going to give a middle finger to the law. Here we go. Depreciative behavior is vandalism, but kind of low-key or 10-ply or soft, as they'd say in Letterkenny. Depreciative behavior is anything that doesn't cause the value or function or structure or integrity of the resource that they're interacting with. Anything that doesn't appreciate or increase the value or function or structure or integrity of that resource, okay? So, depreciative behavior might be stuff like, we're starting our hike and there's a trash can by the trailhead, but the trash can's full, so I'm just gonna wad up my McRib wrapper and throw it in the general direction of that overfull trash can and then go on my hike because, hey, it's not my fault that the trash can is overfull. It's like, no, you could just pack it out with you and not kill yourself to, find a functional trash can. So it's just, depreciative is all the stuff that we don't appreciate when visitors are low-key misbehaving, okay? Now, that can also be high-key misbehaving. It may not be all the way up to the level of vandalism. Question?
Could it also be like cave systems where you're not supposed to touch the wet walls?
Yeah.
I forgot exactly what the name of the rock is. but-
Yeah, so speleothems are the cave formations made of flowstone, and stalactites are down from the ceiling, stalagmites are up from the floor, soda straws, fairy castles, flowstone like the Niagara Formation at Mammoth Cave is 40 or 50 feet tall, something like that, and it's just bounding. It looks like a cascade of water but frozen in stone kind of thing. All of those are extremely, extremely sensitive to changes in pH or acidity or alkalinity. And so the natural acidity of your hand and sweat and so forth and the oils from your skin can cause those speleothems to stop their formation or be radically altered or destroyed with even a few touches in some cases. Depends all on the cave ecology going on there and the flow hydrology. So yes, that's a perfect example. And because we can't replant a speleothem and just be go, be healed and reproduce like we can with grass, hook it up with some nice fertilizer and some watering, good to go. That would be a depreciative behavior that is creating an impairment and is also vandalism. See how these kind of fit together? All right, is everybody clear on those? It's a couple of different sort of faces of the same gem, or we're all talking about the same elephant but from different, right? Vandals are the butt of the elephant. Okay. Amenities are the services that you provide, mostly all in front country, but a few specific ones in back country, like toilets, pit toilets or privies, as they're called, in back country. Amenities are all like the visitor services that you are providing to people. So in some national parks, in the campground, you can connect to Wi-Fi. It's not great, and everybody else is leeching off the same connection, but it's better than no Wi-Fi, right? Amenities are also things like agreeing to work with cellular tower providers to put towers inside your park, which is good and bad, right? We'll talk about why based on how people think about risk a little bit later. So amenities are the services, and the facilities are what you build, design, maintain, install, eventually replace to provide those amenities and services. And those amenities set people up for accessing opportunity. So nobody goes to the Grand Canyon for the bathrooms, but you gotta have bathrooms in order to really enjoy the Grand Canyon. Otherwise, everybody's gonna fall off the Grand Canyon because they all get that same dumb idea to poop off the cliff, and then they fall. People are so upset. Anyway, so amenities services, facilities, installed sites, things like trails, things like visitor centers, things like traffic lights, water pipes, and so forth to provide those amenities. Sound good? Make sense? Any questions? Cool. All right, moving on. When I say the term nature, that can mean a lot of different things. Nature as provider of things that we need, like clean air and water, right? Ecosystem services. Nature could be a nurturing personification or anthropomorphization. Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis that the planet is a homeostatic entity, kind of a superorganism that is actively changing and modifying itself to provide a livable planet for the rest of us on it, is one sense or conception of nature. For us in this class, we're going to use nature to talk about where people are not permanently. We're transitory, we're temporary, we're hiking through, we're sojourners on a journey. And then by extension, nature is not where we live, because that is where we are more or less permanently. Okay. More formally, we're going to define it as the places on the map where humans don't dominate energy cycling, so sunlight, geothermal vents, right, other thermal transfer processes, photosynthesis, material transfer, like rivers are moving material more than humans are moving material over the road in freight trucking or by train, and so forth. Okay? So that is a specific definition for specific reasons. We'll get to those later on in the course. All right, so we would consider this a natural space. Now, unfortunately, lately, research has shown that there is not a square centimeter on this planet where we have not already infiltrated micro and nanoplastics. We have literally found them on top of Everest and at the bottom of Challenger Deep, at the bottom of Marianas Trench, 17,000 feet down, I think it is. Like over 3 miles deep in the Pacific Ocean, there's like empty beer cans and litter from East Asia, right? So this is not a natural landscape, but there are trees here. And there's a lot of forest and outdoor, this is helicopter-based logging, so it's not weird anti-gravity stuff. We have to account for and think about forest recreation management in places that don't look like traditional forests. Okay, we're going to be talking about urban proximate recreation a lot in this class because where not just millions but billions of people are, cities, there's a lot of forest and outdoor recreation happening there, and a lot of need, a lot of demand for the opportunities that you provide as a forester, in specific a park ranger or rec manager. Okay, so we don't want to kind of wall ourselves off into some sort of, hoity-toity elitist sense of, well, the core wilderness areas in the Crown Jewel National Parks are the only places where I go. No, for the rest of us, we need stuff real close to home as well. All right? And maybe we need some fun ways to get back and forth between those two. So this is a car zip line. This technique is called a Tyrolean traverse. Pretty cool. If you guys want to learn how to do this, we can do it. I'm going to use the term protected areas interchangeably with parks, right? So forest and outdoor recreation management obviously centers parks, and in particular national parks, for this conversation, always. But again, the forest system, the wildlife refuge system, the neighborhood dog park system, it all adds up to a whole lot of land. And actually, when you look at what's really going on everywhere in terms of forest and outdoor recreation management, parks can be a very small chunk of that, because parks are a very specific use of relatively small areas. So if you think about Yellowstone National Park, anybody ever heard of it? Yellowstone. All right. When you look at Yellowstone on the map, created in 1872 by Congress in its wisdom, following a recommendation from the Lewis and Clark expedition of, in so many words, and very politely to Congress, they said, it's kind of bullshit. Like, you can't really do anything. It's too high altitude. The soil's too crappy. You can't grow anything there. Let's just turn it into a park. Nobody's even going to notice. Turns out Yellowstone's actually kind of amazing. It's kind of a big deal. I would call it Kardashian tier in the social media of the 1870s. But Yellowstone is a square on the map. They didn't know about ecosystems or watersheds in the 1870s in Congress. They're too busy eating with wooden dentures and having powdered wigs, right? So, I'm kidding, mostly. The greater Yellowstone ecosystem is like a half dozen whole-ass national forests and the John D. Rockefeller Memorial Parkway appended onto the south edge of the square of Yellowstone National Park is kind of its neckbeard or goiter or whatever. Anyway, the park is a very small fraction of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem by acreage. It's core habitat, but you cannot have Yellowstone National Park, one of the crown jewels, the first national park in history. You can't have it work without all of those national forests and so forth. It's a complex. It's a greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And when you zoom out even further and take a look at the entire continental United States, or Alaska, or Hawaii, or Guam, there's a national park in Guam, did you know that? Like, a big chunk of the map is colored green when we're looking at places that are used for forest and outdoor recreation. So in order to avoid having to say park, forest, wildlife refuge, national trail, national wild and scenic river, dog walking park, and so forth, I'm just going to say protected area. Or I might slip up and say park, but what I mean is protected area, and it's that whole list. Make sense? All right, cool. It's a big table, lots of room for everybody. Wildlands are a very specific form of protected area where amenities, services, front country developed stuff are kept out. So we would say that the primary uses of wildlands are exclusively primitive activities. Hiking, backpacking, horsepacking, and so forth. Okay? Now, a subset of protected areas have acres given over to wildlands. A subset of wildlands have acres given over to formally designated wilderness. In 1964, the United States Congress, in its wisdom, just about 50 years after creating the National Park Service in 1916, so 48 years later, Congress creates the National Wilderness Preservation System with the Wilderness Act. And the Wilderness Act told the Forest Service and Park Service and everybody else to pull out all their paper maps back in the 1960s and spend a decade, 10 years looking at those maps and saying, what are the hardest core of your core wildlands? We're gonna designate those wilderness, and any roads that are in them, they're gonna get jackhammered out. Any buildings that are in there are gonna get taken out. And there will be no permanent evidence of human use in federally designated wilderness. So this is a much more specific and restricted, for our benefit, use or designation of wildlands. Okay? Cool. And from there, we'll close with about 15 seconds left. Part of our job is to make sure this land is your land, this land is my land, and it's also the land of everybody else, at least here in the United States. Okay? Our national park system is the first of its kind. It's about 100 years old, and it flies in the face of caste systems and monarchies and all of this stuff. This is for all of us, but it's not automatically successful in that. So there's a little bit of work to be done. All right, Let's end it there. As you guys are packing up, this is one illustration of how access, equity, and justice are difficult for a lot of people. Right? So if you live in this house right here, and your parents say, get off your phone, go outside, do something, and the park is over here, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Wile E. Coyote it across, like, the Mall Wart parking lot and so forth? All right. That's it for class today. I'm around for questions if you have them. We'll pick it up here on Thursday with the development of leisure as a concept and idea. And we'll build that up towards modern park rangering. See you next time.
I have a little question.
Yeah.
Do you know why they made Indiana Jones a national park? Sounds stupid, but like I feel like